My wife and I had just moved to California. It was a couple years after the cat incident, and we weren't going to make the same mistake twice. We were going to meet our neighbors. We're going to show up in their lives. And so my wife goes to baking. She bakes together some pastries, and we start going neighbor to neighbor, door to door, meeting the people that God had placed in our local vicinity. We didn't know it at the time, but we had moved into an all-Hispanic neighborhood, and we were showing up at all of these doors, and we're really the only people that spoke English in the entire neighborhood. And we're showing up at their doorstep with pumpkin spice scones. It's the whitest treat that you can give to anyone in the whole world, but we're doing the very best that we can, and that was when we met her. That was when we met someone that God was going to bring into our life that was going to impact and change our life forever. See, her name was Yari. And we met Yari. It was the middle of the day. It was the middle of a school day. And instead of being at school, she was walking up and down the street. And we're like, we haven't met anyone yet that speaks our language, so she's the one. And so we started talking to her. I said, hey, are you not in school? She said, no, I got kicked out. I said, well, what'd you get kicked out for? She said, for fighting. And I was like, oh, do you fight often? She said, yes. And that was it. That was the end of it. So she's a fighter. And she started talking about all the fights that she had gotten into at school, at home, on the street. And so I've got Yari, the street fighter, talking with me. And I just jumped into her life, and Casey jumped into her life. And we decided that we just wanted to spend time with her. And every opportunity we got, we waved her down, hung out with her, spent time with her. We'd run the dogs out after her to get her to just come and spend any moment that she could with us. And we just began to fall in love with this young girl, this young high school student. Yari had a lot of difficult things in her life, a lot of things that were working against her. She was failing nearly every single class. She was on the verge, not just of getting kicked out for fighting and suspensions, but also because of her grades. She was on track, just like every other member in her family, to not graduate. And that was kind of the lay of the land that we stepped into in her life. But it didn't faze us. We were encouraging. We showed up. We used every gift that we had. My wife is better at math, so she helped her with math. I was better at reading, so I helped her with the reading. And we started to just involve ourselves in her life in every way that we could. And here's what we expected. We expected that all of a sudden the lights would click on and everything would change and everything would get better, but they didn't. Her grades got worse. She got kicked out of school even more for fighting. And we just felt defeated. We felt like, man, are we doing enough? Do we need to have more conversations? Should we show up more? Should we show up less? Are we doing the right things? And maybe you've walked through a season like that. Maybe you've walked through a season where you feel like you're doing all the right things, but you still feel stuck. Maybe through this course, you've been engaging God more closely. You've been listening to your community. You've been leaning in to the purpose that God has created you for, but you still feel like even though you're doing all the right things, something's not quite right. What do we do in moments like that when the path just doesn't seem clear? How do we respond to those moments? I believe the answer is that we listen. There's this story from the Old Testament of a man named Elijah. And Elijah, when we get to this story, he's just had a major victory. He's actually put to death all the prophets of Baal, all the bad guys. He has succeeded over them. Everyone in the land knows his name. He's famous because of it. He's serving God, living on purpose. He's close to God. He's supposed to be hearing from him all the time. He's doing all of the right things. He's living out God's plan for his life. And yet he finds himself literally hanging alone in a cave by himself. And he's feeling defeated. He's feeling stuck. He's feeling sure of not where to go next, even though he's doing all the right things. So he goes into this cave and he starts to hide. And as he's in this cave, here's what happens. We'll pick up the story in 1 Kings. In 1 Kings 19 says that a great and a powerful wind tore through the mountain outside of the cave, and it tore apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But listen to this, the Lord wasn't in the wind. And after the wind, there was a mighty earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord wasn't in the fire either. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard that whisper, he pulled his cloak over his face and he went out and he stood at the mouth of the cave and he finally heard from God. Notice that it wasn't the loud, booming voice of God speaking. It was actually just this giant, gentle whisper. And for me, this messes with my mind a little bit because if you tore through every single Hollywood movie, you got James Earl Jones voicing God like Simba. That's the voice of God that we all know to be true. But if the scriptures are true, God's voice is actually a little bit more familiar, a little bit more of a whisper. And everything that I've been taught in my life is that God shows up in these grand, giant, miracle ways and signs and wonders. And he shows up when we test him, and he shows up and does something big. But the truth is that most of the time, God speaks to us in a whisper. And here's the thing. If we don't slow down, if we don't wait, if we don't listen, we'll actually miss his voice in our life. For Casey and I, we were having so many conversations. We were praying for Yari. We were asking God, what are we supposed to do? What's next? We're just feeling defeated because her life isn't changing. We want to bring hope and healing to her life, but it's just not working. It's not happening. And so I'm asking, should we do more? Should we do less? It was at that moment that we're in the middle of that conversation. We heard a knock on the door, and Yari just walked right in. That was the relationship she had with us at this point. And at this point, she was still kicked out of school. She was still sitting at home. She was still failing every single class. And she came down and she sat on the couch and she said, "Can I tell you guys something?" She said, "Thanks so much for all that you're doing in our lives. I know this is a little bit weird, but I feel like I just need to tell you this. In the nights when I'm by myself, I just have like all of these feelings inside of my head, all of these whispers that it just feels so busy in my head that before you guys moved into the neighborhood, almost once a week, I would cut myself to just to quiet the noise in my life. Just to put those feelings aside for just a second. It was the only thing that worked." And she said, "This is the weirdest thing, but since you guys have moved into the neighborhood, I haven't cut myself a single time. In fact, when I have those feelings, I hope this is okay, but I come over and I sit underneath your tree in the front yard. And there must be something magic about that tree because every time I sit underneath that tree, something changes inside of me. I just feel this peace and comfort that I never knew until you guys came here. I can promise you this, I don't have a magical tree in my front yard. There's nothing magical about my yard at all. There's nothing magical about me and Casey. What is special, though, is that I have a God that speaks, a God that whispers, not just to me and to my wife, but whispers to the people next to us in ways that many of us cannot even understand. And while I'm sitting there trying to hear God's voice right inside of my house, right in front of my house, the people around me are hearing that whisper. And through the words of this little girl sitting on my couch, I heard God speak. Can I tell you something? If you'll slow down, if you'll wait, if you'll listen carefully, God's Spirit wants to speak to you. He wants to speak to you, communicate to you, and give you hope. You fast forward a couple of years, and Yari's life turned around dramatically. We got to go back to California for her graduation because she became the first person into her family to graduate. Here's a picture of that. Right after graduation, she actually got enrolled in college and became the first person in her family to go to college. And my favorite part about Yari's story is a couple of months ago, my wife and I had our first child, a baby girl. And the first person that texted us was Yari, all the way from California. Here's what she said. She said, "Congratulations, I'm so happy for you two. There's no one else that deserves the amount of love and care you two will spread into the world. It's time to pass up my dad card Dad, go be the amazing father I know you're going to be. Mom, keep spreading the blessings and greatness that you shared with me through the years. I love you both so much. Nothing but blessings for your new family. Her life was transformed, and our life was transformed by the whisper of God. If you want to know what God has for you, what he has in store for you, slow down. Listen, because I believe that he's speaking to you right here, right now. We'll see you guys next week. Love you more than you know.
I hope you enjoyed this session. We'd love for the conversation to continue. Please take some time to discuss these questions in your group. And don't forget to pick up the book, God's Plan for You.